Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here. So before I start, raise your hand. Which of you have worked on a digital tool that didn't get the adoption that was expected? Great. That makes me feel much better. So this is not a technology talk. I am not a computer scientist. I have a food science background, and I've spent 20 years in Nestlé leading in R&D, operations, and innovation. And quite frankly, in the last couple of years, it was impossible to be in any important matter in the company that didn't have digital at the center of it. So I had to learn. And I didn't learn from the textbook. I learned from what worked, what didn't work, and asking why. So my talk today is very much about the learnings and the reflections that I apply today to make better decisions. I'm going to structure my talk on 3 pillars. So first, strategy. The second one is about change management, and the third one is purpose. A lot of it has been covered by, or some elements have been already mentioned by Elias. So let's see it now with some specific use cases. So make or buy. So I know I'm addressing a community of food executive, and we are very common with that decisions, right? Do we go to a command? Do we keep it in our factory? We have frameworks for that, right? It's about capacity, recipe confidentiality, process, supply, resilience. But in digital, it's very, very different. So as a non-technology company, when you want to digitalize, you need to make the decision, do we want to build it internally? So that, as it was mentioned, it gives us a lot of control over our data, which is something very, very precious. However, as it was also mentioned, the very risk when you're doing that is that if you build your own tool, you're going to digitalize your processes as they are, with the assumptions embedded in these processes. It will be very, very heavy on time and resources, particularly if that's not your core business. And last but not least, it will be quite slow to show value, right? On the other hand, you can license externally. And then there is a clear data exposure risk. So that's a very tricky decision to make. But the good part of working with external companies is that it will really force you to rethink your processes, or it will force you to know your process very, very well, so you understand how this technology can translate into your company, which is that something that I tell you, it's very, very grounding. You will face, for sure, the not invented here resistance, but it's going to be much faster to deploy and see results. So these are the trade-offs, which, as you can see, is very, very different than when we are making this decision for food products. So it's important that you consider, when you're digitalizing a process, do you want to do it just to be faster, or you want to do it leaner, better, and standardized, right? So as I started to work in digital, being a non-computer scientist, my biggest fear was technology, right? I don't understand the technology, so how am I going to do that? What I've learned is that what makes digital transformation very tedious in the companies is generally the user adoption resistance and also the governance readiness in the company. So let me give you an example through the recipe, a recipe optimizer that we developed internally. So we didn't want to share our recipe data, no surprise. So we had to do it internally. So we spent heavy resources on developing that, and we succeeded. We have a recipe optimizer that is by far industry-leading in capabilities, multi-category features, clear business case. We have the potential to deploy it globally, over 1,500 potential users. Like, what else, right? Let me give you a sense of what I mean by multi-category capabilities. This is just a snapshot of recent launches. This is the complexity we deal with. For our recipes are not only ingredients, but it's also manufacturing processes. So our recipe optimizer can manage from infant formula to Kit Kat to coffee to medical nutrition. Extremely complex. In some figures, that means over 40,000 recipes and more than 18,000 specifications. We are an end-to-end data company, so that's a good foundation and a good starting point, but still is a massive amount of data and complexity. So that was what we built. However, the reality is our product developers were using Excel. So we were asking our experts to go from Excel to a highly sophisticated tool. So what did we encounter in the end? We encountered that they love using Excel because that's what they were used to. There were a lot of assumptions hidden in macros, right? Mineral ratios that were there that they didn't have to think about anymore, compliance things, process details, all in the macros. So when we were asking them, try this tool, they had to think differently. Actually, we were really testing their knowledge, and that makes people very uncomfortable. So when you are facing this resistance in your company, you have to start thinking, what are assumptions that are running silently in my company that I'm not seeing, right? So how did we leverage this friction into momentum? Because obviously we wanted this tool to see the light. We knew that tool was better, so we had to really overcome it. The first thing we did is we had to look for cases that Excel could not solve, right? So we went for some of the most complex part in the portfolio. We picked medical nutrition products, extremely challenging from a product stability point of view, from a nutritional compliance point of view. And we decided to optimize sets of recipes and very complex stuff like oil mixes or vitamin premixes. So to make it simple, things that would take using Excel over a week, we could solve it in a couple of hours. So in the end, the use case was undeniable. The other thing that we did is to expose a new community of early adopters. So when we started to work on this tool, because we were developing it internally, of course, we were working with our R&D, very senior product developers, and that seemed the obvious choice. But when we were facing all this resistance, we decided maybe we should expose different type of product developers. So we started to bring in our product developers based in factories, doing quick recipe adjustment all the time, and surrounded by a very already digital manufacturing environment. And luckily, they loved the tool. They were like, oh, that's actually really helping me. Now I have to deal with all these SAP, no offense, but it's not very user-friendly sometimes, and this is very user-friendly, I can leverage the data. So that started to create a momentum that made this resistance of the R&D developers questionable, and it changed the conversation completely. So when it comes to governance readiness, I put this AI-generated picture as a provocation, because we tend to think about digital food. Digital food doesn't exist. This is not something you can eat. This is not something you can sell. But as food executives, we are used to make certain type of decisions when we produce food. Food is taste. Food is, it's taste. It's how it's gonna nurture our body and so on, right? When you are developing a digital tool, it's not the same. So when you are in the position of making decisions on digital tools, you need to be aware of the differences in the process. So when we develop food products, we have very clear hands-offs, right? From development to deploy to scale. Generally, it goes from one team to the other. And that makes a lot of sense because your costs increase exponentially. But in the case of digital, there's never a completely handoff. It stays with you. You have to keep improving this tool. And that's something very important when you decide to actually develop your tool internally. A very big difference is in a food product, you're going to launch when this product is ready, pretty much. And you're going to judge how the success of this product in the market is based on what you launch. In a digital product, when you launch, it's just the first version. And it will keep improving and improving and improving. And the last but not least is that when we develop food products, we reduce the risk through linear gates, right? We first go with the consumer approval and then the business case, and it's all very sequential. Whereas in a digital tool, is by exposing the product when it's unfinished and accelerating the feedback. So this is a very, very different way of thinking and a very different mental model. What does that mean in practice? So for the teams developing the product, means that they need to understand that they are not developing a finished product and then someone else is going to take care about it, but they are basically delivering the beginning of the adoption, and the work will increase after adoption, right? So back to the recipe optimizer, we keep getting feedback, we keep making it better, we keep developing new features. That doesn't leave us, right? For leaders, we need to make a change on the mental model, and we need to understand the adoption curve, and it's not a stage gate milestone. So many times we kill digital products when they are just at the beginning of the adoption rate. So before you stop a digital product, really challenge yourself, are you applying the mental model for a food product or for a digital product? Have you given the tool enough time and enough exposure to improve? So for us, when we were working on this product development, digitalization, we went in thinking we're going to do things faster, we're going to reduce costs for trials, and the tools have to be very perfect before we expose them, because otherwise our teams are going to reject us or reject them. So what we learned actually is that we did not only unlock speed or cost, but a lot of scope. And that makes a big, big difference. In the current conversation of AI, this is something very important, and it has been mentioned. It's about unlocking new capabilities. It's not replacing people. We learn the real ways of working. And as I said, that was very insightful. When you're leading teams, you're not in the details, and you assume a lot of things on how people is actually doing the work in the day-to-day. So that was a revelation. And we realized that exposing the tool is basically how adoption really happens. So don't keep it until it's perfect. Get the right community working with you to improve the tool. So another learning is when you start this digitalization journey, it's very easy and quite common then to end up with a set of scattered tools, right? Then we have a tool for recipe optimizer, and one for sensory, and one for shelf life, and people doesn't want that. Users, they don't want to have to use 40 tools to do their job, right? Actually, today they do it all in Excel, and they think that it works pretty well. So the first thing is understanding what journey you are trying to design. So Elias, you were talking about connecting tissue, and that's exactly that. So what is the journey? What are the tools that you need to support this journey? And then how are you going to connect these tools? So then the adoption, it will be just natural, right? So it's very important that, I love the connecting tissue analogy. So yeah, the aim is not to have a better tool at each stage, but really to have a connected journey along all the tools. And then, as you say, right, if we can get one journey in every company, then it becomes end-to-end in one company, and then we can go to an industry-wide network. Thank you very much.